All right, welcome again, and we're very grateful for you being with us. This is uh, nine, um, part 18 or 19. I'm trying to remember it exactly. Very thankful that you're with us. Where did the Book of Mormon originate? Where did it come from? And I have to admit, this is going to be the probably weakest part of the evidence. And we have to understand. I mean, if somebody is trying to keep things secret, then there's not going very much that we know about it, right? That's why it remains secretive, right? And once again, um, I'm trying to provide the inference to the best explanation of how the Book of Mormon originated, if it is a man-made book. And remember that I wrote a book called Questions About Mormon Doctrine. Be glad to give it to you for free. It is also located as a PDF online, worldevangelismlibrary.org, and I'll be glad for you to have it. So, because there's just so many problems between it and the Bible, my friends, and we need to. That's why we need to understand that that's a big reason why it could not come from God, because there's so many contradictions, but also just so many problems associated with it. And that's why it's best to show, okay, now we're going to see the greatest probably possible way in which the Book of Mormon came about. So, did Smith and Rigdon know each other prior to Rigdon's conversion in November of 1830? And Von Brody, she says this, but most important, there is no good evidence to show that Rigdon and Smith ever met before Rigdon's conversion late in 1830. There is, on the contrary, abundant proof that between September 1827 and June 1829, when the Book of Mormon was being written, Rigdon was a successful Campbellite preacher in northern Ohio, who, if connivingly secretly with Joseph Smith 300 miles east, was so accomplished a deceiver that none of his intimate friends ever entertained the slightest suspicion of it. And then J.N. Washburn, who wrote Content Structure of the Book of Mormon, he says, another recent discussion of this time-worn theme dealing like that of Shook, who wrote the book, who really wrote the Book of Mormon, with the possibility that Sidney Rigdon was the real author of the Book of Mormon, is that in No Man Knows My History by Mrs. Fawn and Brody in her Appendix B, pages 419 through 433, Mrs. Brody takes the stand that there is insufficient evidence to show that Rigdon had any connection with the writing of the book. Unfortunately, she handles her material with such latitude that even when she is favorable to the prophet, Latter-day Saints are seriously inclined to take her views with reservations. Of far greater significance to me personally than either of the above mentioned works or any other I know in print is that of a young man in Los Angeles. He is still in the making, or was 4 or 5 years ago, and whether anything will come of it remains to be seen. This man, a good scholar and student, is convinced that Stignerton was the main agent in the coming forth of the American Scripture, and believes that given time enough, he will be able to prove it. Now, unfortunately, we don't know who Washburn is referencing here. He goes on to say, I asked this man this question: how do you account for the fact that Rigdon, the main force in the production of the Book of Mormon, according to your view, the man with the background and ability, played second fiddle to young Joseph throughout their entire association? He smiled a bit. I don't know, he answered. The only assertion I can make is that Rigdon misjudged his man, and I can agree with that, actually. During this course of our conversation, he made another extremely interesting statement. I will grant, he said, that if it can't be proved that Rigdon or somebody else did most of the writing, there is nothing left but to accept the statement of your people. For Joseph Smith at 24 did not write the Book of Mormon in 4 months. And then Fairchild said to Deming, he said in another letter dated August 2nd, 1887, the words manuscript story, Connie Creek are still on the paper in which the manuscript was wrapped when Mr. Rice first showed it to me in Honolulu, written with a pencil. Mr. Rice says these words were on the paper when he received it. If you can't obtain evidence that Rigdon was at Smith's house in 1827 or 1828, you will disprove the account of Rigdon's conversion to Mormonism at Mentor, as given in Howe's book, and also the statement in Pratt's pamphlet in the library of the Cleveland Historical Society that he first introduced Smith and Rigdon to each other after the Mormons began preaching in Ohio. You will prove that this distinct effort was made in those early days to cover up the previous acquaintance of Smith and Rigdon. You will prove that the conversion of Rigdon at Mentor was a device for deception planned in advance. So we're going to look at various people who believe that they did see Sidney Rigdon with Joseph Smith. This is Palmer Tucker, and he writes, a mysterious stranger now appears at Smith's and holds intercourse with the famed money digger. For a considerable time, no intimation of the name or purpose of the stranger transpired to the public, not even the Smiths' nearest neighbors. It was observed by some that his visits were frequently repeated. The sequel of the intimacies of this stranger and the money digger will sufficiently appear hereafter. There was great consternation when the 118 pages of manuscript were stolen from Harris, for it seems to have been impossible, for some unaccountable reason, to retranslate the stolen portion. The reappearance of this mysterious stranger at Smith's at this juncture was again the subject of inquiry and conjecture by observers, from whom was without all explanations of his identity and purpose. When the Book of Mormon appeared, Rigdon was an early convert. Up to this time, he had played his part in the background, and his occasional visits to Smith's has been observed by the inhabitants as those of the mysterious stranger. It has been his policy to remain in concealment until all things were in readiness for blowing the trumpet of the new gospel. He now came to the front as the first regular preacher in Palmyra. Then Mrs. Eaton says this. Early in the summer of 1827, a mysterious stranger seeks admission to Joe Smith's cabin. The conferences of the two are most private. This person, whose coming immediately preceded a new departure in the faith, was Sidney Rigdon, a backslidden clergyman, then a Campbellite preacher in Mentor, Ohio. Abel Chase says, I, Abel D. Chase, now living in Palmyra, Wayne County, New York, make the following statement regarding my early acquaintance with Joseph Smith and the incidents about the production of the so-called Mormon Bible. I was well acquainted with the Smith family, frequently visiting the Smith boys, and they me. I was a youth at the time, from 12 to 13 years old, having been born January 19th, 1814, at Palmyra, New York. During some of my visits at the Smiths, I saw a stranger there who they said was Mr. Rigdon. He was at Smith's several times, and it was in the year 1827 when I first saw him there, as near as I can recollect. Sometime after that, tales were circulating that young Joe had found or dug from the earth a book of plates with the Smiths, which the Smiths called the Golden Bible. I don't think Smith had any such plates. He was mysterious in his actions. The peepstone which he was accustomed to look he got of my elder brother Willard while at work for us digging a well. It was a singular looking stone, and young Joe pretended he could discover hidden things in it. My brother Willard Chase died at Palmyra, New York, March 10th, 1871. His affidavit, published in Howell's History of Mormonism, is genuine. Peter Ingersoll, whose affidavit was published in the same book, is also dead. He moved west years ago and died about 2 years ago. Ingersoll had the reputation of being a man of his word, and I have no doubt his sworn statement regarding the Smiths and the Mormon Bible is genuine. I was also well acquainted with Thomas P. Baldwin, a lawyer and notary public, and Frederick Smith, a lawyer and magistrate before whom Chase's and Ingersoll's depositions were made, and who were residents of this village at the time and for several years after. Then Erasmus Turner, he says, the enlarging of original intentions, the transformation from a money-making scheme to a religious endeavor, was at the suggestion of Sidney Rigdon of Ohio, who made his appearance about the time the book was issued from the press. He was unworthily bore the title of a Baptist elder, but had, by some previous freak, if the author is rightly informed, forfeited his standing with that respectable religious denomination. And then S.F. Anderwick says, I was born in New York State near the Massachusetts line, May 7th, 1809. In 1812, my parents moved to a farm 2 miles from the village and in the township of Palmyra, New York. In 1823, mother died, and I went to her sister's, Mrs. Earl Wilcox, where I lived much of the time until December 1828, when I went to live with father, who had again married and settled on a farm on the Holland Patent, 20 miles west of Rochester, New York. Uncle Earl's farm was 4 miles south of Palmyra village, and his house was nearly opposite old Joe Smith's, father of the Mormon prophet. Old Joe was dissipated. He and his son Hiram worked some at coopering. Hiram was the only son sufficiently educated to teach school. I attended when he taught in a log schoolhouse east of Uncle's. He also taught in the Stafford district. He and Sophorina were the most respected of the family, who were not much thought of in the community. They cleared the timber from only a small part of their farm, never paid for the land. They tried to live without work. I have often heard the neighbors say they did not know how the Smiths lived. They earned so little money. The farmers who lived near the Smiths had many sheep and much poultry stolen. They often sent officers to search the premises of the Smiths for stolen property, who usually found the house locked. It was said the creek near the house of the Smiths was lined with the feet and heads of sheep. Uncle's children were all sons, and they played with Smith's younger children. I associated much with Sophorina Smith, the oldest daughter, as she was the only girl near my age who lived in our vicinity. I often accompanied her, Hiram, and young Joe Smith, who became the Mormon prophet, to apple pairings and parties. Joe was pompous, pretentious, and active at parties. He claimed when a young man he could tell where lost or hidden things and treasures were buried or located with a forked witch hazel. He deceived many farmers and induced them to dig nights for chests of gold. When the pick struck the chest, someone usually spoke, and Joe would say the enchantments was broken and the chest would leave. Willard Chase, a Methodist who lived about 2 miles from Uncle's while digging a well, found a great smooth stone about the size and shape of an egg. Sally, Willard's sister, also a Methodist, told me several times that young Joe Smith, who became the Mormon prophet, often came to inquire of her where to dig for treasures. She told me she would place the stone in a hat, hold it to her face, and claim things would be brought to her view. Sally let me have it several times, but I never could see anything in or through it. I heard that Joe obtained it and called it a peepstone, which he used in the place of the witch hazel. Uncle refused to let Joe dig on his farm. I have seen many holes where he dug on other farms. When Joe joined the Presbyterian Church in Palmyra Village, it caused much talk and surprise as he claimed to receive revelations from the Lord. He also claimed he found some gold plates with characters on them in the hill between uncles and fathers, which I often cross. Several times I saw what he claimed were the plates, which were covered with a cloth. They appeared to be 6 or 8 inches square. He frequently carried them with him. I heard they kept them under the brick hearth. He was from home much summer. Sometimes he said he had been to the Broome County, New York, and Pennsylvania. Several times while I was visiting Sophorina Smith at old Joe Smith's house. She told me that a stranger I saw there several times in warm weather and several months apart was Mr. Rigdon. At other times, Smith's children told me that Mr. Rigdon was at their house when I did not see him. I did not read much in the Book of Mormon because I had no confidence in Joe. Palmyra people claim that Joe did not know enough to be the author of the Book of Mormon, and believe that Rigdon was its author. I was acquainted with most of the people about us and with Martin Harris. On my way to California, I stopped in Salt Lake City from July 1852 until March 1853. I received much attention from Mormon ladies because I was acquainted and had danced with their prophet. Then this is W.A. Lilly, who says, I was born in Trumbull County, Ohio in 1815. Our family moved to Chester, the town adjoining Kirtland on the south, in 1822. About 1834, Mr. Pern of Chester told me he used to live in the neighborhood of the Mormon Smith family in Palmyra, New York, and was well acquainted with all of them. He said they were a low family and of no account in the community. He told me the summer before Joe Smith, the Mormon prophet, first came to Ohio, he often saw Smith and Rigdon together. It was the first he knew of Rigdon, and it was before the Book of Mormon was published. He saw Smith and Rigdon start together in a buggy for Ohio. Mr. Pern knew Rigdon well after coming to Ohio and said he believed he was at the bottom of Mormonism. My father borrowed the Book of Mormon, and when he had finished reading it, laughed and remarked Rigdon had done pretty well. W.A. Lilly. Lorenzo Saunders. He says, last evening I had about 15 minutes conversation with Mr. Lorenzo Saunders of Reading, Hillsdale County, Michigan. He had been gone about 30 years from the Palmyra area. He is born south of our village in 1811 and was a near neighbor of the Smith family. Knew them all well, was in the habit of visiting the Smith boys. Says he knows that Rigdon was hanging around Smith's for 18 months prior to the publishing of the Mormon Bible. And then expert of Lorenzo Saunders' interview with William H. Kelly. Did you ever see Sidney Rigdon in the neighborhood where you lived previous to 1830? He said, yes, in March 1827. I went over to Joe Smith's to eat maple sugar, and as I went over, I saw about 20 rods from the house 5 or 6 men standing and talking. One was well dressed. Did you know their names? Yes, it was Peter Ingersoll, Samuel Lawrence, George Proper, the old man Rockwell, Father Porter Rockwell, and the well-dressed man. They stood 10 rods from the road. When I got to the house, Harrison Smith told me that it was Sidney Rigdon, the well-dressed man. Did you see him after that, previous to 1830? Yes, I saw him in the fall just before Joseph went to Pennsylvania, which was December 1827. Peter Ingersoll and I met him rigged in the row between Palmyra and Ingersoll's. I never saw him anymore until he came to Palmyra to preach the Mormon Bible, preach the Mormon Bible maybe. Are you acquainted with Major Gilbert of Palmyra? Yes, 4 years ago I went to Palmyra to see my brothers and I met Gilbert. He wanted to know if I remembered seeing Sidney Rigdon in that neighborhood previous to 1830 when he come preaching the Mormon Bible. He said Abel Chase testified that he thought he saw Rigdon before that time, but was not certain. Says I to Gilbert, Sidney Rigdon was about the Smiths before 1830, in my opinion. Gilbert asked if I would make affidavit that I saw Rigdon at Smith's before that time. I told him that I think the matter over. After a while, I think I told him I would. After I got home a while, I received a letter from Cobb of Salt Lake. Gilbert wrote to Cobb and gave him my address. I wrote to Cobb the next spring. Gilbert wrote to me, I think in November, after I returned home, asking why I did not answer Cobb's letter. While I was writing an answer to Cobb's first letter, my house caught fire and burned up everything I had, and there was no insurance. Lost $1,000. I was sometime thinking the matter over before writing to Cobb, and during that time my house burnt. It has been a long time since those transactions, and it was difficult to fix dates. But I have it now, so I can tell it right now. I have read the statements of Peter Ingersoll and Samuel Lawrence. And he writes another letter. Dear sir, I received your note ready at hand and will try to answer the best I can and give all the information I can as respecting Mormonism and the first origin. As respecting Oliver Cowdery, he came from Kirtland in the summer of 1826 and was about there until fall, and he took a school in the district where the Smiths lived, and the next summer he was missing, and I didn't see him until fall. And he came back and took our school in the district where we lived and taught about a week. Went to the school board and wanted the board to let him off, and they did. And he went to Smith and went to writing the Book of Mormon and wrote all winter. The Mormons say it wasn't, I think they meant wasn't wrote there, but I say it was because I was there. I saw Sidney Rigdon in the spring of 1827, about the middle of March. I went to Smith's to eat maple sugar. I saw 5 or 6 men standing in a group, and there was one among them better dressed than the rest, and I asked Harrison Smith who he was, and he said his name was Sidney Rigdon, a friend of Joseph's from Pennsylvania. I saw him in the fall of 1827 on the road between where I lived at Palmyra, and Palmyra with Joseph. I was with a man by the name of Jugasaw, spelling doubtful. They talked together, and when he went on, I asked Jugasaw, spelling doubtful, who he was, and he said it was Rigdon. Then, in the summer of 1828, saw him at Samuel Lawrence's just before harvest. I was cutting corn for Lawrence, went to dinner and took dinner with us, and when dinner was over, they went into another room, and I didn't see him again until he came to Palmyra to preach. You want to know how Smith acted about it? The next morning, after he claimed to have got the plates, he came to our house and said he got the plates and what a struggle he had in getting home with them. 2 men tackled him, and he fought and knocked down both down and made his escape and secured the plates and had them safe and secure. He showed his thumb where he bruised it in fighting those men. After he went from the house, my mother says, what a liar Joseph Smith is. He lies every word he says. I know he lies because he looks so guilty. He can't see out of his eyes. How dare he tell such a lie as that? The time he claims to have taken the plates from the hill was on the 22nd of September in 1827. And I went on the next Sunday following with 5 or 6 other ones, and we hunted the side hill by course, and could not find no place where the ground had been broke. There was a large hole where the money diggers had dug a year or two early before, but no fresh dirt. There never was such a hole. There never was any plates taken out of that hill, nor any other hill in that country was in Wayne County. It's all a lie. No, sir, I never saw the plates, nor no one else. He had an old glass box with a tile, spelling doubtful, and about 7 by 8 inches, and that was the gold. It was the gold plates. And Martin Harris didn't know a gold plate from a brick at this time. Smith and Rigdon had an intimacy, but it was very secret and still. And there was a mediator between them, and that was Cowdery. The manuscripts was stolen by Rigdon and modeled over by him, and then handed over to Cowdery, and he copied them. And Smith sat behind the curtain and handed them out to Cowdery, and as fast as Cowdery copied them, they was handed over to Martin Harris, and he took them to Egbert Grandin, the one who printed them, and Gilbert set the type. I never knew any of the 12 that claimed to have seen the plates, except Martin Harris and the Smiths. I knew all the Smiths they had not much learning. They were poor scholar. They was poor scholars. The older ones did adhere, spelling doubtful, to Joseph Smith. He had a peepstone he pretended to see in. He could see all the hidden treasures in the ground and all the stolen property. But that was all a lie. He couldn't see nothing. He was an impostor. I now will close. I don't know as you could read this. If you can, please excuse my bad spelling and mistakes. Lorenzo Saunders. Then Lorenzo Saunders, being fully sworn, deposes and says that I reside in Reading, Hillsdale County, state of Michigan, that I was born in the town of Palmyra, New York, Wayne County, state of New York, on June 7th, AD 1811, and am now 76 years of age. That I lived in said town of Palmyra until I was 43 years of age. That I lived within 1 mile of Joseph Smith. At the time, said Joseph Smith claimed that he found the tablets on which the Book of Mormon was revealed. That I went to the hill Cumorah on the Sunday following the date that Joseph Smith claimed he found the plates, it being 3 miles from my home. And I tried to find the place where the earth had been broken by being dug up, but was unable to find any place where the ground had been disturbed. That my father died on the 10th day of October, AD 1825. Then in March of 1827, on about the 15th of 7th month, I went to the house of Joseph Smith for the purpose of getting some maple sugar to eat. That when I arrived at the house of said Joseph Smith, I was met at the door by Harrison Smith, Joe's brother. That at a distance of 10 or 12 rods from the house, there were 5 men that were engaged in talking, 4 of whom I knew. Fifth one was better dressed than the rest of those whom I was acquainted with. I inquired of Harrison Smith who the stranger was. He informed me his name was Sidney Rigdon, with whom I afterwards became acquainted and found to be Sidney Rigdon. This was in March 1827, second spring after the death of my father. I was frequently at the house of Joseph Smith from 1827 to 1830. That I saw Oliver Cowdery writing, I suppose, the Book of Mormon, with books and manuscripts laying on the table before him. That I went to school to said Oliver Cowdery and knew him well. That in the summer of 1830, I heard Sidney Rigdon preach a sermon on Mormonism. This was after the Book of Mormon had been published, which took about 3 years from the time that Joseph Smith claimed to have had his revelation. And then we have Emily Coburn, and this is what she writes. By this time, my faith had grown weak in regard to change her mind. I thought it best for me to go back to my brothers, and henceforth to let them alone. I considered it deception and delusion, but as I was necessarily detained over the Sabbath, I attended services with my sister. The discourse was delivered by Oliver Cowdery, an elder of the Mormon Church, and a witness to the gold plates. After preaching, several were baptized, and the converts were increasing rapidly. For some time, having meetings daily and also evenings, the excitement was great, insomuch that many were overcome by the Spirit and were seemingly unconscious of all around them. On awakening from this trance, they would say they were happy and had seen angels, and talk with them. However, I did not feel interested in this direction. It hitherto appeared most simple of all things, and I was decidedly against such proceedings. I was still detained at my sister's. For some reason, I could not get back to my brother's in Sanford, and at this time I cannot remember the cause of my prolonged stay. While I tarried, I attended church with my sister. Sidney Rigdon came into Colesville, this is New York, preached to a numerous congregation. We did not class him as a Mormon, as we were informed that he was a Baptist minister from Painesville, Ohio. The words of his text, O foolish Galatians, who have bewitched you, that you should not obey the truth. It was neat and interesting. Great attention and silence prevailed, and it was acknowledged by all to be the best sermon ever preached in that vicinity. He stayed several days, seeming to have special business with Joseph Smith and the leaders of the new Mormon church. Now, what you're going to see here is this is taken from Cowdery, and I believe so is taken from Shook's book. Now, I'll just what we're trying to do is, okay, these witnesses say they saw Sidney Rigdon at a particular time frame or a particular time window with Joseph Smith, and we want to see if that's correct. Now, what you can do is you can certainly stop the video and read these for yourself. So I'm going to skip a little bit here. So we're going to skip 1821, 1822. I'm going to skip also 1823, and there's no really real reason to read these unless you want, if you wish to read them. I would love for you to do so because you're learning about the history. All right, 1824 is here. 1824, 1825. still in 1825, and then we're moving into 1826. And now, let's see. Yeah. Okay. So, I would read Cowdery's book, The Spalding Enigma, and they have two big chapters on Oliver Cowdery. And that their hypothesis is as it says on October 1st or somewhere around there. If the hypothesis presented in this volume is correct, then Oliver Cowdery's first encounter with Sidney Rigdon took place on or about the state during a tent meeting revival held at Greensburg, Ohio, about 30 miles east of Mantua Center, and only a mile or so north of the farm of Oliver Cowdery's cousin, Ambrose Cowdery Jr. If Cowdery was in Ohio at this time, he must have returned to New York soon thereafter, because the school term began in late October, and we have already demonstrated that Oliver taught during the 1826-1827 school year. Okay. Let's get a little bit more. So I just want you to see where Warren, Ohio is located in regards to Mantua Center, in regards to Bainbridge, and in regards to Mentor. And you could read that if you like. Then we have here, we're going to see, let's see. Yeah, so it's interesting. March 16th, Dency Thompson, the Rigdon's family live-in helper since 1824 in Pittsburgh, is married to Orrin Henry. The ceremony was apparently held at Charlton before Justice Canfield. It is not known why they did not have Rigdon perform the ceremony. March 17th. Due to the last entry for the Rigdon family and the ledgers of the Kent family mercantile, indicating the approximate date of their move to a new residence at Mentor, 22 miles north. Although no records soon exist, Rigdon's preaching at Mantua probably became more regular after this. It seems possible that Rigdon's 16-year-old niece, Amarilla Brooks, later Mrs. Amos Dunlap, accompanied the family to Mentor and remained with them for a time as Dempsey Thompson's replacement. Remember, she was the one that said, "You're looking over that paper." That Sidney Rigdon was looking over the paper, and the wife said, "I mean to burn that paper." And Rigdon had said, "I'm going to make something great out of this." Now, if he had met Oliver Cowdery already, and there was something made to where is a case they got together. Then we have 1827 March and April, and this is, we need to read this, all of this. So, no specific dates given, but most likely at some point after his move to Mentor from Bainbridge, Rigdon allegedly holds protracted meetings at Mentor, during which he baptizes Nancy M. Perkins Sanford, Mrs. Seth Sanford, 1810 to 1887, William Dunson and wife, and others. According to Smith, History of the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, this information was provided to Elder Edmund L. Kelly by Nancy M. Perkins Sanford of Mantua, Ohio, during the time Kelly lived at Kirtland. As Kelly lived at Kirtland between 1884 and 1891, and as Mrs. Sanford died in February of 1887, the information dates from between 1884 and 1887. Unfortunately, either she failed to mention her maiden name, Perkins, and provide him with specific dates of her baptism, which seems unlikely, or for some other reason he deliberately chose to omit both from his report. And this information occurs in a chapter where Kelly seeks to demonstrate that Rigdon's responsibilities in Ohio between 1826 and 1831 were so great that there was no time in his schedule for him to have been running back and forth to New York, as alleged by supporters of the Spalding Enigma. This lack of specificity, man, that's a hard word to say. Specificity. Yeah. It's kind of like saying the word statistics. I've always had a hard time. So forgive me. I'm going to skip on. Suggests Kelly, who seems to have had no qualms about distorting evidence, could well have been trying to cover up something that went on during these very critical months. In this light, and it is important that all mentions of Rigdon's supposed protracted meetings at Mentor during these days, during these 2 months, derive from Kelly's references as cited above. Now, it is March of 1827. Well, he said, Lorenzo Saunders has said this. He saw Rigdon in the spring of 1827, about the middle of March, during the maple sugar season. He saw him at Smith's home in Manchester. And George Arbogh says this. Again, about the middle of March 1827, Rigdon was with Smith making plans. Seeing a better dressed man, Lorenzo Saunders asked who he was. Harrison Smith replied that it was Sidney Rigdon, a friend of Joseph's from Pennsylvania. The Mormons have tried to prove that Rigdon could not have been in New York then or at any other time, but the attempt turned out to be the strongest substantiation of the reported visit. At just the period mentioned, there is a gap about a month in the record of his activities at home. Again, in May 1827, Rigdon seems to have gone to Palmyra for a conference, for he is reported to have been there early in the summer, and at that time there is no record of his having been at home. He could make the trip to Palmyra and back in 10 days. And we also want to refer to Charles Shook's study of careful analysis of Rigdon's chronology as well, and also the statement of Mrs. Eaton. As far as can be determined, there is no other supporting documentation for Kelly's claim. Most likely Nancy Sanford and the others named were baptized at Mentor during this period, but it's not possible to be more specific based on extant records. If these baptisms occurred in March, then Rigdon's activities for the remainder of that month and all of April cannot be accounted for. April, presuming that Rigdon's alleged protracted meetings were held at Mentor in the closing days of March and the early days of April, then Rigdon's whereabouts following these meetings are entirely unknown. So in May, Rigdon's whereabouts are unknown for about an entire month. And then June 16th to July 3rd, Rigdon is likely out of town based on letters remaining. See July 6th. And this is where you can look at July 6th there. A list of letters remains at the Mentor post office, including Sidney Rigdon, Painesville Telegraph, July 6, 1827, list as of June 30th. And July 23rd to August 6th, a gap of 18 days. Rigdon possibly out of town. He's tardy in recording above marriage. See the next. Okay. And then we have this. September 17th through October 8th. Rigdon's whereabouts are unknown. During these 22 days, Ashtabula is one day's travel on the road to New York. If Rigdon was planning to meet Joseph Smith on the night of September 22nd to deliver the reworked Spalding manuscript, this is a good beginning. A departure from Ashtabula on September 14th gets him to Manchester by the 17th via stagecoach and the Erie Canal. And if he stays there a week, he still gets back to Mentor in plenty of time for the following marriage. So Abel Chase said he saw Rigdon 1827 before stories began to circulate about Joseph finding the plates. Sometime in the summer of 1827, saw him on Smith's farm. And you can see there in the summer of 1827, July 23rd through August 9th, that is possible when Abel Chase claims to have seen Rigdon. And then we got Lorenzo Saunders' second sighting. He said just before Joseph Smith left for Pennsylvania. So that would have been before December 1827. He said he saw him on the road between Palmyra and Ingersoll's. So if we go back, that is before December, right? September 17th through October 8th. And then we have several things going on here. So we're just going to go on through this, if that's okay. You can read for it for yourself. Then we have 1828 started occurring. Now, here's an interesting thing that happens. So we know that Martin Harris was doing the translation mostly for Joseph Smith. But then what happened was he allowed 116 pages to be given to Harris, and somehow they either got lost, they got destroyed by maybe Martin Harris's wife. We're not exactly certain, but we do know that they were lost, they were gone. And what's interesting is right after that, in the summer of 1828, his whereabouts are unknown, and that 116 pages occurs during this time. And then so Miss F. S.F. Anderwick says she several times saw him in warm weather several months apart prior to December 1828 in the Palmyra area. And so that could be very possible. That's where she saw him. And then October 14th through December 31st, there's a whereabouts that are unknown for 79 days. And then 1829 comes around. Then there, July 2nd through August 6th, their whereabouts are unknown for 35 days. And W.A. Lilly says that, of course, this is secondhand testimony, that Mr. Pern had saw Rigdon summer before Joseph Smith came to Ohio and before the Book of Mormon was published, so that would have been before 1829 in Palmyra, New York. So if you go back, we are there before. Then we got 1830, so March through June 18th, Rigdon's whereabouts are unknown during this extended period. And this is kind of interesting here because Erasmus Turner says he saw Rigdon about the time the Book of Mormon came off the press, spring of 1830, in the Palmyra area. And then the remainder of July through August 24th, Rigdon's whereabouts are uncertain during this period. The following events from August 9th through August 21st are based upon the testimony of Emily Coburn Austin. So Emily Austin says she's possibly had seen Rigdon mid-August of 1830 in Colesville, New York. She attended a sermon preached by him. Well, and so it happens that in August 30th from October 21st, that Rigdon's whereabouts are unknown for 53 days. And like you can see there, August 15th, Rigdon preaches a Sabbath sermon attended by Emily Coburn and her sister. Now, here's something interesting, if I might talk about this. So, notice August 13th, Sidney Rigdon arrives in Colesville. And then it says August 14th through 15th, meetings are held between Rigdon and Joseph Smith and the leaders of the New Mormon Church. And then Rigdon preached a sermon on Sunday after that. So, Rigdon and Cowdery depart from Palmyra. So, I kind of wonder if they were talking about, his professed conversion, how they were going to go about giving him the Book of Mormon. That's my speculation though, because we know in August 27th through 29th that there was basically separation between Rigdon and Alexander Campbell at Austintown. And then notice here the whereabouts are unknown August 30th through October 21st. And then notice, if you don't mind, that it was around November 1st when Cowdery and Parley Pratt arrived at Rigdon's home and presented him with a copy of the Book of Mormon. Van Wagner puts this date at October 28th, probably based on Howe's accounts of the Painesville Telegraph, and it's possible too. So, as you can see, we don't have a lot of evidence, but you can see that they do fit within those window gaps, and I find that to be interesting. So you be the judge of whether these people are reliable eyewitnesses. I think that's something that needs to be looked into. I really appreciate you being with us. I'm very thankful. Have a good day.